this is really the crux, right? It's like, how can we rethink an economic system that puts the people in the center as opposed to the abstract value of like a token? Like, how do we prioritize well-being over wealth, in a sense, or the wealth of well-being? So that example is a really good one. And yeah, I'd like to know, what do you think is also the end game in terms of if a community is able to effectively transition from a centralized economic system into something that's more mutually based? What would that mean for the people that live in that community?
Yeah. So I start with the basic building block, which is that imagine that I have a reputation in the community and you have one too. Let's say we are in a sangha together and we know that, oh, okay, this is Dexter. He has good reputation. He's someone who contributes a lot to the Digital Bodhisattva, to digitizing all the work that INEP has done and put it on the website and newsletters and whatnot. So he has great reputation. So like Dexter could issue, like say, 100 reputational currency that's backed by your reputation. So to say that, okay, well, for now I need some bread. Like, would you accept like a piece of bread for like 10 like Dexter reputational currency? And someone else could agree to that and say, of course, I can take that for you. And so that is the start of like, okay, you have now a kind of a system that is facilitated by the liquidity of the resources in the network, based on me like baking some bread for you, and you like maybe in the future giving me some form of that exchange too when I go back to you and say, hey, Dexter, I have 10 of your currency. Might you help me like record like a podcast? And you're like, okay, yeah, that works. So that is the start. Now, then what you want to do also, like I think it's important for us to have a frame of like this global system that right now, in a way, how we talk about poor people is actually fundamentally incorrect, right? Because from a climate change perspective, the people who are poorest actually have the most climate credit, and the people who are the richest actually have the most carbon footprint and therefore the most climate debt. So in our system, we could also say the reputational system also recognizes that the ones who are richest actually have more debt and vice versa. Now, that, of course, is a voluntary system. So someone who is richer would be like, okay, well, maybe they don't want to join. I mean, that's another problem that I will talk about, like a third building block after this. Now, the second building block, though, is like, imagine that we have a way of giving people livelihood within the community that's not dependent on the outside system. Like ideally, you want to foster everyone to pursue their own gift in the economy, like in a way that doesn't depend on people telling you that, okay, this is like not something that will earn you money. Like you want to be a farmer or something like that. It's not going to earn you money. Now, the important thing to think about is like this circular economy, like this donut economics that people talk about in regenerative economic space as well as regenerative finance space, where it's actually a circularity. You want to focus on creating like a grassroots of liquidity. And for the third building block that I think is important also is to understand how market works. So the reason why the kind of market that we have today, it actually works on the fundamental that unfortunately people who were impoverished or colonized and whatnot will the injustice, inequality in that versus the people who are gaining from the system is actually going to widen and accelerate very quickly. That is the by design, the system that we have today. Now, what can we do to intervene that is where we hope that through like books like the Bob Meiser's book around justice and option, to understand that actually grassroots movements, like for example the Occupy Wall Street movement, or the student like strikes, like they were kind of strikes like student debt. Now that kind of movement did not have a way to sustain themselves because they still are dependent on the current system. But based off of the book that I just mentioned, we actually do have like a startup in the crypto space now, like agency.give is one of them, which is exploring how can you give people a way to get movement, to create a DAO, to then be able to pull together funds. And then they didn't announce this, but if you really take Bob Meiser's vision to its fullest, then you could actually also pair it with some shorting of like the kind of unethical companies, for example, like the indigenous people in Standing Rock in the US can actually pull together a fund to short the very stock of the companies that are building the pipeline, the oil companies. So that is just one of many examples of what can be enabled when you could gather funds together, and you could also access the kind of financial instruments that were not possible before because it was traditionally in the hand of like financial big banks only and big hedge funds and whatnot. And that is an important means of production, like a means of production that we don't talk about now, like how financial industry is a means of production too, given that we look at it as essential to be able to survive. Everyone, every NGO wants money, but we don't look at it as okay, but who is controlling the means of production?
Yeah, I think another fruitful example to bring this back to the concrete reality that I think a lot of engaged Buddhists are working in, and like you say, a lot of NGOs, would be something like development banks and how they fund large projects that can destroy ecosystems and destroy communities by virtue of infrastructure projects or whatever it happens to be that happen kind of all over the world. Could you give an example, like you just said, about how a kind of community-based fund might be able to do the work of supporting these communities by using a financial instrument and as a new tool for defending their rights and making sure that their voices are heard on a financial table, not just from an ethical perspective, but being able to use a new means of organizing to actually push back against kind of the financial powers that be. Could you kind of try to contextualize that?
Yeah, so let me understand the development bank that you are talking about. Are they, can you give me some example? Are you talking about more of the UN type banks, like microfinance? Is that the kind of banks you're talking about?
I think so. I mean, I've heard of development projects in the Mekong region that are building dams or basically, I think the dam is the example where the infrastructure project is put through by a government that want to generate more electricity, but the say of the local people that live in that area aren't really taken into account, and the environment and their livelihoods basically suffer as a result of kind of international pressures and a lack of representation of their those peoples. So in what ways could this kind of financial tool of of a regenerative finance, how could it help them through a kind of community fund?
Yeah, so if we reimagine the situation of trying to build more dams in the Mekong region to generate electricity, for example, that we could, for example, put together a fund, like, and this can be initiated by the community too. I think that's the most important part. Like where communities could actually choose to do like, okay, well, instead of like a big dam, we actually want like a micro hydro system where as long as there's a river that's flowing, that we don't build a dam that destroys the environment around us. There's also a micro hydro plant. But in the context of like a larger system, you could also say that there are a lot of signals that you could program into the design of the, let's call this an electricity fund currency. You could design into the system like one, like, okay, right now we want to take away the dam. We want to take away parts of like maybe all those people's houses or like this bio region because we want to build a dam. But what kind of what is it connected to? Like it's there's all this livelihood that's involved, and be it like in terms of the people who are going to lose their house or the lives of the animals and beings that is around. Now, this can also be plugged into the global carbon credit system as well, so that it's not, you know, like say flooding the whole area that gains you like funding. There's also an ability to say like, okay, if you preserve the area as it is, it actually sinks a certain kind of carbon that gives you funding. So then you don't need to build such a large scale system. And on top of that, you know, the currency, the electricity fund currency, can also have stakeholders like programmed into it, like meaning like, you know, imagine like the ideal scenario is this is actually like a community initiative, right? They actually want the electricity. They so instead of it just being like a top-down initiative where like someone decided that it's a good idea without accounting for the community. So in the ideal world, in the future, this kind of a top-down approach doesn't happen anymore. Like, you know, we look at like, for example, the United Nations, like often like pouring money into, in the name of international development and foreign aid, into like a conflict zone and then building schools, for example. But then after spending millions of dollars leaving, and there's the local community actually never got trained to how to run it or how to train the next generation of people. And so the school just turned into like shackles, like ruins. Now, what we want to see in the future is an alternative to, okay, well, someone else who's not part of the local community, like dictating how quote unquote growth or development needs to look like. Because also understand that there's a logic to why growth is necessary for the current capital system. Because if you don't have that, then what is happening is that say the richer hedge funds actually, they don't hold money. They actually hold more of assets in the form of stocks, and that they all depend on this logic that the more money will make more money, or the kind of liquid stocks and whatnot will make more. So once that flow stops, that the entire system stops, because then we get into inflation, and then we get into a market crash and whatnot. So so it's important for communities to be able to have a way to express themselves, and also pull together funding as necessary for their community without sacrificing the environment. So
yeah, that's a really great way of framing that as a form of community empowerment, using tools that previously were not accessible, in terms of being able to coordinate the members of the community to build their own fund that can also present value to the stakeholders that wanted to build the dam in the first place, to present different qualities of value that were not likely not integrated into their planning process. Like you said, carbon credits for not destroying the environment around a dam, so all these things. It sounds like this type of economic, like, capacity building to train community leaders and community members how to present these types of systems. That is a way of tackling the kind of structural violence that people have been experiencing from top-down systems, which sounds like a wonderful application of engaged Buddhism to financial problems, which those kind of ultimately are. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and so one concept that I would add on top of that is this collective intelligence or collective wisdom, that a lot of local community have more of an understanding of how that Mekong region works. Like, for example, how, like, so ChiPunk has a project that we call Science of Life, which is how you gather the signal of life, like what is life giving. Like, if I can see that, every day there is 10 fish that actually swim by in an hour versus like 2 fish. So then I know that the lives are actually taken in the process of like building the dam. And those are all like signals of health, well-being, or vitality that can be built into this currency fund, so that the community can actually input their own collective intelligence instead of having to resort to protest and anger as the only way. Because then, you don't have what is most uniquely valuable to you, which is kind of like the indigenous people also know your land better, right? So they know when is their land more healthy and when is it not. And they can actually step in more effectively than like the big agency who have never been to that region. So it's important, like, as engaged Buddhists, to me, to know that, okay, well, we don't have to all be aiming towards life goal of being one of the Fortune 500 companies. It's important to acknowledge that they are the ones who have most power right now. However, there are a lot of wisdom and intelligence from the ground that for all the previous decades, we have never been able to coordinate with one another. And you could look at currency as a way to coordinate with one another, so that this kind of wisdom from the ground can actually intervene in time for climate change mitigation.
Excellent. Yeah, it really sounds like a means of making the intrinsic value that surrounds a community accessible and understandable to communities that are outside of that context, so that they can understand, there's actually this metric that has been created by this community to demonstrate that, like, in economic terms, that the amount of fish that swim by is valuable to us, and in fact is actually valuable to probably this external stakeholder in a different way than they had previously understood. So it's like a way of kind of broadening the understanding of what is value from a place of the heart, which is kind of, which is more integrated and holistic, as opposed to the more extractive, narrow, like dollar bill sign attached to every watt of electricity that's produced. So that's really beautiful. I think that that can definitely make an impact when articulated and presented to communities in a way that they can connect with. Yeah.
And also to emphasize the point around like intervening in the cycle of, to me, like the kind of dependent co-origination that makes us more dependent on the current system. Like, for example, like electricity, like, well, the alternative is that we get more and more entrapped in the current Mara system, where because there's less fishes, now maybe you need more electricity to freeze the current fish that you have. Like, instead of being able to enjoy the abundance of life, you keep an entire ecosystem thriving. Like, maybe now you need to rely on more farming, more like turning what is a healthy and alive system to some kind of monocropping. Like that, then makes you more and more reliant on the current system that gets you more in samsaric cycle, instead of finding one where we could use the kind of noting intelligence that we have from our mindfulness to know, how is our relationship with nature? Is it in harmony? And how can we put in our intelligence from our noting mindfulness practice into our currency, so that we are not using currency to destroy our system and become and enslave ourselves to become more in the Mara samsaric cycle, but we can actually use that to liberate everyone too, and invite more people to participate in, can we apply even more mindfulness and know more signal of what makes this whole region alive?
Yes.
And there's indigenous groups, for example, that I know of in New Zealand, who's trying to do that now with their piece of land using crypto Web3 tools.
Fascinating. Yes, this reminds me of what you've mentioned before in terms of like the kind of capitalist system heating up the planet, both physically in terms of like Celsius degrees going up, but also kind of mentally in terms of the agitation that it creates internally around, if we're depleting our resources, we become almost more desperate and maybe perhaps more ruthless in the way that we're treating our environment because there's less of it. But if we're able to integrate a new form of understanding value that recognizes the intrinsic value in things, not just their extracted dollar signs, that's a kind of cooling energy. Because we feel the value of the interbeing, not just in spiritual terms, but in almost economic terms. And then that kind of quiets our mind and helps us feel more at peace and in harmony with the world around us and each other. I really love the way that you have contextualized that before.
Yeah, I mean, one way to talk about this is that morality is the foundation for concentration practice and for wisdom practice. So without sila, you can have samadhi or panya, but then, the kind of system that we're in today, bound to, get us out of our morality practices. Like, for example, like what, like if we know that we are destroying life, like, that has a certain way that will take away from even when we meditate, and, it will take concentration. So in a way, like, we can talk about, our practice, but at the same time, like, the engaged practice is like knowing, okay, what system are we participating in right now? Like, for example, the indigenous people in New Zealand, they're starting to put in the stories of like how they have stewarded the land over the years into the crypto tools like NFT, which really just is, again, like all these fancy terms are just another way of saying, okay, like, how can we gather signals that can make something come alive in a way that is in accordance to our morality, instead of taking it away, where right now we don't have a say. The only resort we have is anger. So that is like a different loop altogether. So I've used the word heating and cooling to describe the relationship between how we are interacting with the financial system, that because of how it is designed, it is heating up the earth. There is a way that we're still discovering now, and hopefully with the help of everyone, like what is a cooling system like? Because a cooling system fundamentally is situated with the knowledge of local community in the region who knows like this whole web of life, this whole interconnected system that you are a part of. So that is a very important perspective to be able to contribute.
Yeah, it sounds like what is developing out of this, I guess we call it ChiPunk then, this blending of the economic understanding with this dharmic awareness is a kind of toolkit that can be applied in like an open source manner to any community, as a way for them to be able to contextualize the value that's around them, that they already feel and understand, into terms that can be easily translated into like a larger market space, so that that value can be respected and protected amidst a system that is quite violent towards intrinsic value. Would you say that that's fair, that you're kind of building a toolkit? And if so, what do you think is needed? What types of people would you like to be able to engage in that build phase of being able to create a toolkit that really can support the diversity of communities that hopefully it would be able to help? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that would be tremendously helpful, which is for community to understand that, yes, there's a lot of complicated systems that we're talking about here, but let's have an open mind. Let's, we might not understand everything right off the bat, but we can see that, there are people trying, like the grassroots economic initiative. They are working with around 15 communities around the world to help them design their own community inclusion currency, is how they call it. So the community inclusion currency will be able to instill the community wisdom as part of it. And of course, with that design, there is sometimes some technical language, because it is programming something. Now, that is again, a test of kind of harmonious cooperation that can happen between people who want to help using technical skills and people who are part of the local community to be able to bring forth their local intelligence. Now, that is an important relationship to cultivate. It's kind of like the Sangha being supported by the villagers, and that kind of virtuous feedback loop. So I think the most important one is that one, and I feel like everything else can gradually fall in place if we can start feeding like a virtuous feedback loop between people who, yes, there's a lot to be said about people in the crypto Web3 space who are tech bros who think that they are saviors and whatnot. But it's also genuinely a lot of people who are trying to apply the decolonized mindset to designing this, and a lot of them are in the regenerative finance space. So what's needed is mutual learning.
Yeah, wonderful. I think that this is a very dynamic project that is, I think, really benefiting from the diversity of understanding. Like having experts like who really understand economics, as well as Buddhist practitioners and Dharma teachers who are understanding these dynamics of like kind of group dynamics in terms of our relationship to the environment. It's key, and yeah, I'm really excited to be involved and be able to help share what's going on with ChiPunk and be able to follow it and support it. So is there anything else you'd like to say? Maybe where people could find out more.
Okay, sure. So would be truly helpful is curating a group, a sangha, I hope, who is interested in learning deeply. How can we find out what is Buddhist economics like in the Buddha's age, and how can it be applied into the tools that we have, so that we don't create more delusion in the world. And there's so much research work to be done to unearth that and then implement that. So all are welcome.
Excellent.
And I hope that, Dr., we can also create more content together as well. This has been really helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience on this. I look forward to being able to share it more. Thanks.